February poll and the March poll that we took just prior to the election, there was some sort of change in District 12. The numbers suggested to me something most consistent with a mistake or a campaign strategy change.
Objection, Your Honor, to a lack of foundation. May I be heard?
Sure.
The witnesses testified to an alleged method he used called pattern matching. If I could direct the judge to a particular piece of case law on the third page of the document we handed to you. Specifically, that's Tarot Readers Association of Midlands versus Merrill.
Okay, what's your point?
This case in this jurisdiction tells us that in order for expert testimony to be admissible, it needs to be not only relevant, but also reliable, and specifically designates the judge as the gatekeeper of such evidence in determining reliability. We've heard from the witness that it is reliable, but we have no basis for that. And Tarot Readers Association specifically goes through a list of prongs that might be met. Things like being standard in the field, having a known error rate, it being subject to peer review. The idea of matching patterns, Your Honor, I don't believe satisfies that requirement.
Your Honor, first of all, the witness has testified to his experience and education in this area. He's testified he's a college professor in political polling. He's testified he's conducted thousands of polls, that he had sufficient facts and data in this case. Any further points on this are for weight, not admissibility. Those factors, as listed in Tarot Readers versus Merrill Dow, aren't dispositive. We don't need to list every single one of them and have them establish every single one. That'd be a waste of the jury's time. But if counsel wants to cross-examine on them, he's free to do so.
If I may, Your Honor?
Sure.
I'm neither questioning the witness's experience nor saying that these metrics are dispositive. However, the fact that the witness is claiming that he can look at polling data and say that that matches with patterns of political activity that he's seen has no basis in his testimony thus far. No error rate, no subjection to peer review, no evidence of being standard in the field, and until any of that foundation is laid, I move to strike with having a lack of foundation.
Your Honor, we've established that these are the standard methods in his field, the ones that he learned in university courses on political polling, and the ones that he now teaches in university courses on political polling. We've established he's a professional in this area, that he relies on these principles regularly, that he's conducted thousands of polls, and that he's accustomed to doing this sort of comparison of data with political trends.
You can have that in one cross counsel, but the objection's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Continue, please.
What were you saying the numbers reflected after Ms. Ginger's Bellevue support maxed out?
Like I said before, between February and March, there was some sort of change that we saw. I found that the numbers were most consistent, in particular with a strategy change or perhaps a mistake on Ms. Ginger's part.
Just to be clear, Mr. Michael, were the numbers consistent with misinformation fraud reducing her votes?
Not particularly, no. I actually have a chart.
Objection, Your Honor, to an improper opinion. There's been no foundation laid as to this witness's knowledge of misinformation and fraud in elections.
We haven't heard about that, counsel. Let's lay a foundation.
Of course, Your Honor. Mr. Michael, do you know what the allegations of misinformation fraud made today are?
Yes, I do.
Were you able to look in the numbers for evidence of that misinformation fraud?
Yes, there are certain types of drops you'd expect, mostly a global drop in overall votes in the event of misinformation fraud. So I looked for that pattern, which would be consistent in the numbers.
Did you find it, Mr. Michael?
I renew my objection, Your Honor. I wasn't referring specifically to the witness's lack of knowledge about what the alleged fraud in today's case, but specifically the witness's inability to comment on what fraud would look like in an election. We've heard no experience of this witness in analyzing what impact fraud has on elections, and until that testimony has been elicited, and I have a good faith belief that it can't be, I'd move to strike as being an improper opinion.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Did you find that the polling results were consistent with misinformation fraud?
No, I didn't. I actually prepared a chart to explain a more consistent theory.
Permission for the witness to step down and make use of this chart?
Sure. You've already seen this chart, right, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead. Thank you.
If you turn it around for us once you get up there, Mr. Michael.
Sure.
What are we looking at?
So this top chart that you see here, the table, shows Ms. Ginger's support changes in the 12 districts of Truman between our February poll and our March poll. Now, to be clear, these numbers, they're not changes in the actual number of voters, so to speak, but changes in the number of people who reported liking Ms. Ginger, supporting her as a candidate.
Why is that consistent with some sort of strategy change rather than misinformation fraud?
Well, as you can see here, there's a small gain that Ms. Ginger makes in 11 out of 12 of these districts. In fact, every single district except District 12, where she was originally campaigning quite a bit. As you see here, in District 12, Ms. Ginger's numbers drop by 8 points. Now, that pattern that we see of a dispersion of resources is actually quite consistent with a shift of resources of a campaign, of a shift of strategy, particularly away from a support base toward other areas where there hadn't been as much attention.
I'm confused though, Mr. Michael. If she's leading in 11 of 12 districts, why didn't she win the election?
I'm sorry, to be clear, in these other 11 districts, Miss Ginger's not winning. She actually only made small gains there. I believe in 8 out of 11 districts, she was still losing.
Mr. Michael, is it possible that misinformation fraud would have caused that 8-point loss of support and enthusiasm in District 12?
No, the fraud that I was asked to evaluate, all of the allegations were neutral in their content. They wouldn't have changed how people thought about either candidate. They didn't say, vote for Miss Ginger or vote for Mayor Heisman. It was simply misinformation about the voting process as a whole. And so what we'd expect to see is an overall drop in vote count in the district, but not a swing of support between the candidates, which is what you see with that -8, a swing from Miss Ginger to Mayor Heisman.
Well, Mr. Michael, don't we see an overall drop in votes as well?
Yes, there is an overall drop in the numbers, but it's not consistent with misinformation fraud in this case, because as Miss Ginger's vote counts drop, Mayor Heisman's actually increased from 141 to 240, which indicates that there was an actual change in the people's support, who they truly thought was the better candidate.
Can you take your seat, Mr. Michael?
Sure.
So in sum, sir, were you able to conclude to a reasonable degree of professional certainty as to whether or not misinformation fraud was the most likely cause of Ms. Ginger's loss of votes in District 12?
Yes, I was. I found that fraud was not the most consistent explanation. More likely, a more consistent explanation would be some sort of dynamic change in how her campaign was run or how she interacted with the people. Something changed support, which indicated to me that that was a more likely cause of the drop in support she received. So I found that there was not an outcome change due to misinformation fraud.
Is it that Ms. Ginger's voters didn't turn out, Mr. Michael, or something else?
Well, no, it's not that they didn't turn out. As you can see, there was a shift. So it's that she simply lost them to Mayor Heisman.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Nothing further.
Thank you, counsel.
Mr. Lestbader, would you like me to keep this up or take it down?
You can leave it up. Can you see that, Mr. Michael?
Yeah, I'll be fine. Thank you.
And Your Honor, see the demonstrator?
Sure.
And permission to proceed. Good evening, Mr. Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for coming out here. And I want to start with a few questions about you.
Sure.
Now, it's fair to say that you have quite a bit of experience in polling and politics, right?
Yes, I got my bachelor's and my master's. It's what I've been doing for about 15 years.
Been in the field for over 15 years, you said.
Yes.
Conducted thousands of surveys, I believe, were your words, right?
I have quite a bit. Through my firm, of course. Personally, I wouldn't have time to do thousands of polls, but I administer them all through N5.
Of course, sir, but personally, you do have a lot of experience talking about polling and politics, right?
I've done some work talking about my work in politics as well, yes.
You write for newspaper columns,
Yes, I do. That's
talk on television shows,
occasionally, not very often.
radio shows.
Sometimes.
It's fair to say that you're trying to convince your audience to believe your interpretation of the data, right?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, certainly, sir, when you give your opinions on these radio and television shows, you're trying your best to make your audience believe you.
Well, I talk about the methods of how we conduct statistics. It's just science, I suppose. It's not really something that I want them to believe or, well, not believe.
Well, you want to make sure your audience understands and agrees with your message, right?
Yes, how statistics works.
Sir, would you have any reason to want the members of the jury to believe that fraud didn't change the outcome of this election?
No, I mean, it's the truth, so I suppose that's the reason.
Sir, you were paid $500,000 by this woman, true?
Personally, no. I wish I had paid $500,000.
Apologies, sir. The firm you are the sole owner of was paid $500,000 by this woman, right?
Yes, my firm does receive payment for our work.
Of course, sir, and you've worked with the mayor on 4 different campaigns, right?
Yes, for
Every campaign she's ever run in.
I'm not entirely sure. We don't ask about their prior history, just what they're asking us to do. We conduct the polls.
Sir, you worked with her in 2 mayoral elections, right?
Yes, this will be this was the second.
2 city council elections.
Yes, there were two.
The mayor doesn't have any more elections to run in. You're not going to get another $500,000 from her, are you?
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel testify.
When that's cross, you pretty much can.
Just the first element of this, the first statement, the mayor's not going to have any more elections to run.
If I may, Your Honor?
Well, hang on, you finished, counsel?
It's just not on the record, Your Honor.
Response?
I said if the mayor has no more elections to run,
I'm
Your Honor.
not sure that's quite the way I heard the question, so why don't we sustain it, back up a few steps and take another shot at it?
Absolutely, Your Honor. But let's say the mayor has no more elections to run in. Would you be receiving another $500,000 from her?
From the mayor, no.
Well, all right, sir. During your work, you also reviewed an election audit contributed by Leighton Davis, right?
Yes, I believe Mr. Davis conducted the audit.
You reviewed that audit and reaching your conclusions in today's case, right?
I read the document.
And you reviewed it and relied on it in your conclusions, true?
Well, I didn't make any mathematical conclusions on someone else's work. No.
Sir, you relied on the document in making your conclusions, true?
I read the document.
Sir, is it your testimony that you did not rely on the document in making your expert conclusions?
I read it over to compare, but I didn't make any mathematical conclusions based on it.
Sir, I'm going to have to redirect you back to my question. Did you rely on that document in reaching your expert conclusions?
Objection, Your Honor.
Basis?
I'm just unclear what conclusions he's referring to. There's a distinction between the conclusions that the witness has given on the stand and some that are listed in his report about the validity of the audit. So if counsel could parse that out, if he could ask the witness whether or not he relied on this audit in reaching the conclusion that he testified about here today, I think it'd be much simpler.
If I may, Your Honor.
Fair enough, don't you?
Your Honor, I don't believe it's necessary. In particular,
I think it's fair enough. Parse it out.
yes, Your Honor. Now, specifically, you read through that audit to see whether your conclusions matched up, right?
Yes, I found that the audit didn't match with mine.
And specifically, you disagreed with the audit's conclusions, right?
Yes, I thought there were a couple incorrect assumptions that the audit made.
You published your report a couple days after the audit did, right?
I think it was a couple days after.
And did you publish that report before or after you were paid $500,000?
Oh, well, I mean, most of that money was years ago. But we receive a flat fee before we start our work. That way, we're not finding anything based on an economic incentive.
Of course,
Standard
sir.
practice.
Well, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the work you did conduct in today's case. Now, specifically, you mentioned this idea that you relied on called pattern matching, right?
Well, I believe that's what the attorney said, but it's more of it's not just pattern matching. It's not like shapes and triangles.
Well, sir, you called the method pattern matching when you first testified about it, right?
Sure, I mean, it's a cross-comparison analysis of existing literature with everything that you see in this given election.
So I'd like to do some cross-comparison analysis with you right here, if that's okay.
Sure.
Specifically, I'd like to do that with some of the things that the defense has alleged throughout today's trial.
Sure.
Now, they said that there was a gaffe that could have contributed to a drop of support for Ms. Ginger in District 12. Would that be consistent with what you found?
Yes, a gaffe could certainly lead to a drop in support.
Well, naturally, sir, if it was such a big gaffe, Ms. Ginger, she must have tanked in District 12, right?
She certainly would have lost support in the district.
She must have lost it by a landslide.
Support?
Lost the election in District 12 by a landslide, right?
No, from what I understand, what I saw, Ms. Ginger was strongly up in the polls. She did lose support, but she was still up in the election.
Sir, if this gaffe had such a big impact, certainly she must have at least lost District 12, right?
Like I said, no. Ms. Ginger was popular in District 12, but she did lose 8 points of support.
Sir, could you tell the members of the jury what percentage of the votes in District 12 did Ms. Ginger win on Election Day?
I believe it was 82%.
Well, if 82% of people were going to support Ms. Ginger, naturally, if more people turned out in District 12, that would help her, right?
Yes,
And so you wanted to look about whether there would be enough people to switch the outcome of the election.
that's correct.
Specifically, when you did that, you concluded that there wouldn't have been enough people, right?
Exactly. I found that fraud was not the most likely cause of that change.
You made an assumption when you did that, right?
I'm not sure which assumption you
Or
made.
you assumed that there would be no fundamental shift in voting behavior, right?
Yes, I found that that wasn't likely.
Well, of course, sir, you did find some pieces of evidence to say that it was, right?
I'm not sure what you're referring
Well,
to.
Ms. Ginger was from District 12, right?
Yes, she was already quite popular in the district because of that.
There was rising unemployment in District 12.
There was rising unemployment.
That tends to be blamed on the incumbent.
Yes.
And of course, sir, voter registration went up by 48% in District 12, right?
Yes, quite a bit. We saw a surge in registration, ostensibly for Miss Ginger. It seemed that people were voting more for her.
And sir, you can't rule out that Ms. Ginger would have won the election without fraud, right?
To a 100% degree of certainty, no, that's not exactly what I was called in to determine.
Sir, you can't rule it out, right?
No, I can't rule it out entirely. It's not statistically possible.
Now, sir, you talked on direct examination about 2 surveys you conducted, right?
Yes, February and March polls.
It's February 17th and March 14th, right?
That's right.
You were asked how many? 24. 24 questions, right?
I'm sorry?
You were asked 24 questions?
When?
On direct examination, sir.
I don't know.
Well, sir, not once did you talk about the third survey that you conducted for the Heisman campaign, right?
Which survey do you mean?
Your Honor, Commissioner approached opposing counsel and the witness in turn to plaintiff's sake. Of course you do. And would Your Honor like a copy for reference?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Mr. Michael, this is a survey you conducted, right?
Yes, this is our demographic data report that we take.
It's a survey, right?
Yes, it's a type of survey.
It's a third survey you conducted.
Yes, I'm sorry, I thought you meant a poll about people's opinions.
You relied on this in your conclusions.
Yes,
You gave it to the Heisman campaign.
I did. Back in February is the report date.
We offer plaintiff's sake.
There's no objection.
All right, it's admitted.
Mr. Michael, we've heard testimony today about people being told they couldn't vote if they didn't own a home. I'm looking for a number. Which district had the lowest home ownership rate?
Shit. It appears to be District 12.
Well, we also heard testimony about people being told they couldn't vote if they didn't graduate college. Which one did you tell the mayor had the lowest college graduation rate?
Again, District 12.
Highest arrest rate?
District 12 as well.
Highest unemployment?
Also District 12.
No further questions.
Brief redirect, Your Honor. You still have the document in your hands, right, Mr. Michael?
I do.
Can you just read the full date of the report, not just the month?
February 3rd, 2014.
2014, sir, was Ms. Ginger a candidate in 2014?
No, this was over a year before the election.
Just to be clear, Mr. Michael, you said that there was a drop in votes for Ms. Ginger. Based on your review of the evidence, what's the most likely explanation for that drop?
Like I said, the most likely explanation would be some sort of change or a mistake on Ms. Ginger's part. That's what I found.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
No recross, Your Honor.
May I step down?
Thank you.
I'll just leave it on there.
Sure.
Counsel, do you have any further exhibits or evidence or witnesses to offer at this time?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests its case. We're ready to move on to closing arguments after a break or whenever your Honor wants. Excuse me.
That's fine. How much time do you guys want? 5, 10 minutes or what?
5 minutes would be great, Your Honor.
5 minutes good?
5 minutes is fine.
Let's keep it close to the 5 minutes this time. Okay? Where's our time? We're going to sit over there? Okay. Okay. Plaintiff ready to make the closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed, please. You may be seated, folks.
Sir, before I proceed, can I just retrieve Plaintiff's Exhibit 3 from the members of the jury?
Yeah, they're all yours.
Photograph. Sure, it's perhaps back there.
I've got an extra one.
Ah,
for you.
I can grab one from the
Photograph?
bench. The photograph. Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Of course.
May it please the court, counsel, co-counsel, ladies and gentlemen, follow the lies. When we first heard the story of today's case, when we first saw the facts, we heard a story about strange phone calls, late-night meetings, and misinformed voters. It was difficult to imagine that a public servant could have been behind all of this. But members of the jury, though the evidence doesn't lie, today it is shown that this defendant did. And eventually, the facts of this case make it clear that what happened in the weeks leading up to when voters crowded into polling places to choose their leader was something different. That this isn't the misunderstanding that we all want to believe it was. Because if we work backward, if we start with the election fraud on election day, and we consider that misinformation, the cover-up, and trace it all back to the beginning, the evidence of this defendant's wrongdoing is clear. Because all we have to do is follow the lies. See, today you heard about a man who was passing out things about voting requirements that just weren't true, intimidating the people of District 12. But members of the jury, the election fraud in Truman, it didn't begin with this man on election day last month. Now, this is a story that began long before. You see, our story began 4 months ago, behind the walls of a campaign office meeting with the inception of a strategy to suppress votes and a decision to intimidate the people of District 12. When that defendant looked at a mayoral race that was getting close and decided that she didn't need to follow the rules. And it's because Ms. Ziegler chose to come forward that we know the truth of where this story began. It's a late night in February. She told you that the man, the same one who gave those voters those flyers, who made those phone calls, he opens the back door, looks around to see if anyone's watching, and walks into the Heisman campaign headquarters. There he meets with the mayor, gives the mayor the number to a burner phone he had bought just that afternoon, collects his pay, tucks it into his jacket pocket, and sets out on the work that the mayor didn't want to do herself. You see, members of the jury, all of that misinformation, the reason all of those folks in District 12 aren't able to vote on Election Day, it all comes back to this moment, to this meeting, to that man sitting across the table from that defendant. March 20th, the mayor showed a photo of that man, told what he did, and asked if she knew him. The man in that photo? I have no idea who he is. Never seen him before in my entire life. The words of this defendant. You see, today it was our burden to prove to you that what happened in District 12 wasn't a fair election. The law in Midlands is very clear, and it tells us that if someone conspires to misinform or intimidate voters with the intent to suppress legal votes, then they must be held responsible. What this means, members of the jury, is that if you believe, by the preponderance of the evidence, remember, that's just a tip of the scales, a hair over 50%, that when this mayor met with that man, when she stored the number to the burner phone he used to misinform voters in her cell, when she denied knowing him at a press conference, that she meant to prevent people from voting, then you must find the defendant lying. And members of the jury, you heard evidence of intentional election fraud from not one, not two, but 3 witnesses during the plaintiff's case in chief. When first Mr. White, and then Ms. Ziegler, and finally Mr. Garcia walked through those doors, made their way in front of this jury box, sat in that chair, and helped to connect the defendant to this wrongdoing by helping you to follow the lies. And Mr. White told you that he was given information about voting that was false. Told that he couldn't go to the polls on Election Day if he hadn't graduated from college, if he didn't own a home, if he'd ever been arrested. He was told that if he tried to vote and broke these rules anyway, he'd be fined $5,000. He could be thrown in jail. He told you that the man who was spreading all that misinformation was the man in this photo, a man that we know by the name of Casey French. And just moments after Mr. White stepped down from the stand, Ms. Ziegler sat up there and she told you that this strategy was the mayor's from the very beginning, that she was the architect for months. She sat there, members of the jury, and told you that she saw the mayor meeting with that man just weeks before the election took place. That she saw the mayor who authored this election fraud strategy meeting with the man who spread it to voters. But you didn't just have to take her word for it. That's because Gregory Garcia, an expert in the field of cell phone forensic analysis, took that stand and told you the very same day that Ms. Ziegler said she saw that man in the campaign headquarters, the very hour she said she watched him walk in the back door to meet with the mayor, that man's burner phone number was stored into the mayor's cell. But this isn't just a story that you heard from the plaintiff's witnesses on direct. No, it's something that you heard from the defense's own witnesses on cross. You see, Mayor Heisman, she took the stand first today, and of course she's going to tell you, members of the jury, that she had nothing to do with this. Of course she's going to deny knowing how that phone number got into her cell, but I wrote down her words, because the defense's only excuse for how the one number that was used to misinform all of those voters got in their client's cell phone came from the words of this defendant. I don't really know. Members of the jury, she told you that she let Ms. Ziegler go, and that Ms. Ziegler couldn't be right, but members of the jury, they offered no evidence to contradict what Gregory Garcia told you on the stand. Members of the jury, that phone number, it wasn't just used to contact a few voters, it was used to communicate with nearly 2,000 people, like Mr. White, in an election that the defendant won by 200 votes. You heard from Miss Sandberg, a reporter right next door in Truman, who told you that she herself saw a campaign strategy memorandum that suggested that the mayor wanted to suppress the vote. She told you she knew that the defendant lied in that press conference when she said she'd never met that man before, and that that man, he had been convicted of fraud and impersonating police officers in the past. That the mayor knew that if she needed to go to somebody to make sure that she could suppress votes, well, he was the right man for the job. And finally, you heard from Professor Chase Mike, who tried to tell you that all this fraud, it didn't change the outcome, but the only thing you need to remember when you think about Professor Michael is the number $500,000. It's what was paid to him by this defendant, giving him every reason to sit on the witness stand today and sell you his version of statistics that just don't agree with the facts. See, members of the jury, that man and this man, they targeted people. They looked at everyday people and decided that they could convince them that they weren't good enough to vote, that they were second-class citizens. These are people who couldn't afford to go to college. People like Mr. White who deserve our protection more than any others. People who work day in and day out to make the lives of their kids just a little bit better than the ones that they've had themselves. Our voice is the most important thing that we have. And if the people that we put in power try to take our voice, if they lie and they deceive to prevent people from voting, we have to hold them responsible. I realize that what I'm asking you to do today isn't easy. It might be easy to say that because the mayor's a public servant, she never would have wanted this to happen. Easy to say that because the mayor wasn't the person handing out those flyers or making those phone calls, that she wasn't behind it from the very beginning. But we don't come into a courtroom to do what is easy. No, we come into these rooms to do what is right. Follow the lines. You'll find this defendant, and I'm confident you'll find her lying. Thank you.
Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
Yeah, of course.
May it please the court, counselors, members of the jury, Mr. Fields asks you to follow the lies because his case depends on two lies. From his second witness, Samantha Ziegler, and we'll get there, but first I'll ask you not to follow the lies, but to follow the facts. Let's talk about some facts. What we've heard here today. I remember in his opening statement, Mr. Lustbader came before you, said it'd be a complicated trial. Said he wanted you to look at it through a narrow lens. Let's try to see simplicity through all that complexity. Of the 6 witnesses that we heard from today, how many of them told you that they didn't vote in this election as a result of any sort of misinformation fraud? Of the 6 witnesses that we heard from today, how many of them told you that they knew anyone who didn't vote in this election as a result of misinformation fraud? Of the 6 witnesses that we heard from today, how many of them told you they saw the mayor distributing misinformation fraud? Of the 6 witnesses that we heard from today, how many of them told you that they heard the mayor distributing misinformation fraud? Of the 150,000 people, counsel wants to talk about voices being heard. Of the 150,000 people who made their voices heard by voting in the 2015 mayoral election, how many did they call to the stand who didn't vote as a result of misinformation fraud? How many did you hear about of that entire population of Truman Midlands who didn't vote in this election as a result of misinformation fraud? The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, the mayor is not responsible for any sort of misinformation, and whatever misinformation there was, they couldn't find a single voter who was persuaded by it. Folks,